Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome back to the Daily Palace podcast, brought to you by the Global Sports Podcast Network. Happy New Year to Crystal Palace fans. This is my first pod of the new year, so just want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas that's just gone and a happy 2025 to everyone. Joining me today to look ahead to our upcoming clash against Chelsea is Dan Tanner. How are you doing, Dan?
I'm doing all right. We are now into the new year. All that Christmas stuff is now done and dusted. We can now go full force into the new year. Let's see if we can't actually get something out of it.
Yeah, that's right. It was a bit of a patchy end to 2024 for Palace. So we're looking ahead to some more positivity to start 2025 and hopefully a good finish to the campaign for us. So our first fixture of 2025 is actually at home. We take on Chelsea on Saturday at 3 p.m. at Selhurst Park. We're going to preview the game in this pod, just look at a bit of team news, look at the form of both teams, then make some predictions to finish. So looking at the Palace squad ahead of Saturday, it's a bit of an in and out situation in terms of Mark Guehi is back after serving his one-match suspension. But Nathan Chalobah, one of our other centre-backs, is out because he can't face his parent club in Chelsea. So he's unavailable. And then we have a couple of long-term injuries with Matthias Franke and Adam Wharton who are out. Looks like until February maybe, or Wharton at least the end of Jan. So we won't have those two for a while. So I guess the big discussion points, Dan, are the kind of centre-back situation. Firstly, what do you think about Guehi coming back in? How much of a boost will that be for us?
It's more the thing of like him actually being there is a little bit more of a reassurance because he is one of our best players and one of our star players. And hopefully we can keep him through until January and have him through to the rest of the season. And then we have that conversation afterwards. But at the moment, he's one of ours. So until that changes. But yeah, just a reassurance of him being there. He is a top centre-back. Not done the greatest performances, I think, this season. He's had a couple of very, very spectacular own goals. So if he can kind of do it at the other end, be greatly appreciated. But he's been fairly solid, fairly decent, nothing overly spectacular, but just having essentially the captain there, the reassurance that he's there is a bit... It's nice to have him there, really. There's not much can really say that we already have mentioned on this podcast before. So it's cool that he's still there, really.
Yeah, he is a boost for us. He's obviously our captain as well, and it's great to have these big players back for the games against the teams in the upper table of the Premier League. You know, Guehi's experience is invaluable, really. So yeah, it's great to have him back. Interesting about his, you mentioned about hopefully we'll keep him throughout January, but that's a discussion for another time. I'm sure will come up in the upcoming weeks. So we move to Chalobah then. Obviously can't play in this one because Chelsea, we've loaned him from Chelsea. He's come up with a few goals, unlike Guehi at the right end of the pitch recently. And he's found some scoring form. I think he's got 3 this season now, and he's been a bit of a menace. Him and Lacroix in particular, from set pieces and corners, have really shone in those situations. And sometimes against the bigger teams, you know, you do tend to utilise the set pieces a bit more. So do you think in that sense, Dan, Chalobah will be a miss more in the attacking sense than the defensive?
I think it will be missed. It's kind of annoying because of the sort of whole Chelsea parent club thing. I'm not sure if it's a outright rule, but I know Chelsea like to use that clause in those contracts to make sure they don't score against them, essentially. Because I remember we had the same problem with Gallagher a couple of years ago where he was on form for us and then Chelsea just goes, nope, you can't play him. It's that simple. You can't play him against us. And we're like, oh, well, all right then. But missing him in the attacking, probably we will miss him a lot because we do still have a slight problem of, scoring goals. We're still sort of doing 1 or 2 at a time and they're they're spread out. I will give it that, but we need sort of as many attacking options as we can. But it's still the next man up. So the American Chris Richards now has to take that spot for release a game. So hopefully he can start to do some damage up there as well, and then sort of we can have a bit more of a rotation system going, and we don't have to play the same players over and over and over again. So that's my kind of thoughts on it. But he definitely is going to get missed that attacking option. And because Chalobah is actually quite good at sort of dribbling the ball forward as well, he's pretty good playmaking sort of defender. So that will probably miss as well. There's kind of link-ups with the defensive midfielders, which definitely against a big club like Chelsea is definitely going to get missed.
Yeah, it's a good point to pick up, actually, because I think the last 2 or 3 games, Chalobah's really shown his like composure a bit more, and like you say, like ball carrying has been really good. I think against Southampton and Bournemouth, he was like really direct at going into the opposition half. I'm not sure whether if he was playing, would have had the same freedom to do that against Chelsea, who I think perhaps would close him down a bit quicker. But I think it's just a sign of his confidence, really. Like, he had a bit of a shaky start, few mistakes, wasn't match fit. But I think the last few games, he's really become a key player for us. But you mentioned there Chris Richards, who barely seemed put a foot wrong for us. He's so reliable and a great option to have. Just as a backup / first team defender, he's a really good option. Do you see anywhere else across the pitch, Dan? Any other changes coming up, or do you think it'll be business as usual in the other areas?
I think it'll be largely business as usual. We have a very sort of short team sheet. So I think pretty much, unless there are any other little niggles in training today, I don't see it changing all that much. We're going to definitely be sitting back trying to sort of defend against Chelsea and hit them on the counter, which seems to be the strategy we've implemented over the last couple of weeks to great effect, especially like teams like City and Villa to great effect, where they're sort of collapsing in on them and making everything really difficult to play through. We'll ignore the Arsenal games because that didn't really work against them. But so I would pretty much expect the same team that we've been putting out the last few weeks, because we're just not that deep when it comes to most positions.
We do have a small squad, and we might look to address that in January. But for the moment, it's our first team is doing the business, which we'll come on to in the next part when we look at some team form for Palace and Chelsea. So stick with us after this ad break. Here at Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform. Zencaster came out the clear winner. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs, it's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencaster. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of the Daily Palace podcast. I'm Alex Waite and I'm joined by Dan Tanner, and we're looking ahead to the Palace versus Chelsea clash on Saturday. So we're just going to look at some form now for both sides. Palace, surprisingly, are actually in very good form, very hard to beat, but not many wins in our recent games. So it's 1 loss in the Premier League in the last 8. But we, over the Christmas period, picked up a 0-0 against Bournemouth and then beat Southampton 2-1, thankfully, to build a bit of daylight between the relegation zone, which was handy. But I just want to start with Chelsea, Dan, really, because it looked like they were really gunning for Liverpool at one point, sort of until late December. You know, they were, I think, about 5 points behind Liverpool and looked like their closest rivals. But in the last 3, it's... I shouldn't laugh, but I am. They've capitulated.
I'd be laughing as well. So, Man United. So
it's not often we get to chuckle at the big teams, but we will when we can. So Chelsea are winless in 3 now. and not games you'd expect them to drop any points in. Really, it was a 0-0 at Everton. Sean Dyche diced Chelsea quite a bit in that game, and then it was 2 losses against Fulham. Chelsea were cruising and then conceded twice in the last 10 minutes. And then a 2-0 defeat at Ipswich. Ipswich hadn't won at home, I don't think, until that game. And then Chelsea go there and then, lose 2-0. So how do you feel about this on Saturday then, Dan? Are Chelsea there for the taking, or do we have to be careful of their potential comeback?
I'm not sure, because I said I was very confident against the Arsenal one when they were having their little spat, and then we go and get mullered. And I wasn't very confident against City, and then we go and get a 2-2 draw. So I'm not sure, but it's still very dependent on what Chelsea shows up, because they can be very passive or just being very lackadaisical about the way they play, or they will just turn up and absolutely rinse you. Just ask Wolves at the beginning of the season when they get battered 6-2 right at the beginning. And then we play them and get a 1-1 draw out of them at Stamford Bridge. So it's very dependent on what Chelsea actually shows up. But I'm still going to be slightly hesitant, because they have been kind of cruising recently, to sort of getting the results they needed to, and not. They've got a couple against what you would consider the title rivals as well. So they're not going to be pushovers. They've still got a decent enough squad, so it's going to be interesting. But yeah, they've. I think they're in the same form as we are in the last 5 games. 1-1 drawn and then lost 2. So we're based. It should be fairly close, actually, but I'm not really sure which way it's going to go.
Yes, I think this is a tricky one for us, because we're almost better off playing the top teams when they've won a few, and then they come to Selhurst and we give them a good game and either get a point or win. Sometimes the patterns of our results are we'll play a team when they're down and then they'll beat us. That's just the way it is being Palace, unfortunately. But the way you mentioned it in the previous part, Dan, about how we approached the Arsenal game, and we obviously got hammered 5-1. Do you think it would be silly of Glasner to do the same against Chelsea? I mean, it is how he seems to want us to play at home. Is very front foot, very getting stuck in, quite overloading players forward. But do you think if he tries that again against Chelsea on Saturday, do you think we might get punished again, or do you think it could work?
I think he's pretty much going to carry on doing. That's his style, so he's very much stuck to it. It worked against City. It sort of worked against Spurs, so it can work. But we just went up against Arsenal where they just tore us apart, really. It wasn't even close. But Chelsea are a little bit sort of slower on the build-up. They don't go full-on rushing. It's try and condense the passes and try and sort of not quite pass it into the goal, but they're going to make sure they get the high percentage and do high percentage passing. They're not going to be sort of bombing it down the pitch unless they have to. It's also very slightly dependent on which Cole Palmer shows up as well. If the fantasy football dream player shows up and he goes and scores 4, then we have a problem. If he just gets hamstrung or something, then I think we're a little bit more sort of confident in getting something out of it.
Yes, sort of with the Arsenal game, if there are similarities, it is that we need to keep the key players quiet. We didn't do that against Gabriel Jesus. I think that's how you pronounce his name. It's not Jesus, is it?
It's not Jesus. It's Jesus, I think.
Yeah, Gabriel Jesus. It's my classic South London rubbish pronunciation. Butchering Brazilian names. But if we can keep Palmer quiet, you sort of feel like we'll have a chance. But then again, similar with results, he hasn't scored for a couple of games. Is this the one where he actually shows up? Because I think he is one of the players in the Premier League, when he finds a bit of form, he's just impossible to play against. I think at the end of 2024 for the calendar year, he had the most goal contributions of any Premier League player. Like, he's just an assist and goal merchant. He's both. So he is someone that we need to keep quiet. And I think if we do, we might be able to get a good result. Do you think there's anyone else, Dan, from Chelsea who we need to keep an eye on to try and get a positive score on Saturday?
I'm not really sure on sort of the Chelsea one sort of on the regular, because, well, they kind of not exactly rotate, but they've got so many players to their billing now, so I'm not sure who's even on the squads anymore. But just, it's predominantly Palmer, I think, is definitely the one we have to keep quiet. Jackson, if he's fit, definitely got to keep him, because he's got some speed to him. So if he comes charging down at like Lacroix or Gahey, I don't see them keeping up with him, not on a sort of a straight line sprint. That's kind of really it, because most of the time sort of Chelsea just kind of plod along, do their business. They're not doing anything hugely spectacular, but they're just going in and getting the results they need to.
Yeah, I mean, they have some class players, especially in those attacking positions. They sort of line up similar to us as well, with the wing backs, the three defenders. So tactically and positionally, it will be quite interesting to see how it unfolds. But yeah, if we can get the better, of those key players, then I think we'll hopefully have a good afternoon at Selhurst. Right, we're going to have a break there and then come back for our score predictions in the final part. So stay with us. This podcast is part of the Global Sports Podcast Network, the only network bringing you exclusive daily news and views on your Premier League team, the Premier League, women's football and fantasy football. A unique listening experience that puts fans first, bringing you the very latest breaking news from your team. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and make us your first listen every day. Global Sports Podcast Network. Every club, every day. Welcome back to part 3 of the Daily Palace podcast. We're just going to have a final look now at the game against Chelsea on Saturday. So, Dan, you mentioned earlier in the pod that we held Chelsea to a 1-1 draw at Stamford Bridge in September. It was actually the first time we haven't lost to Chelsea since 2017. So it was a big result for us. A long run without beating them or taking anything from them. So do you think that will help us on Saturday, just having a bit of confidence that we finally ended that run and we know we can get something from them?
I think it probably would get a little bit of confidence that we've already got points off of them, but we also have a fairly decent record against the title contenders as well. So I think that will also probably play into it as well. We got a draw against City recently. We got draws against United. Just sort of, I think, and we beat Spurs at Selhurst Park as well. So we are going to be, it's going to give a bit of confidence that we've already at least taken something off of them and that we can do it against the big guys. It's just more of the thing of which Chelsea shows up, because they can, when they switch on, they can rip a team to shreds quite easily and quite handsomely. And it also very much depends on what Palace shows up as well, because we can have a great habit of making life difficult for ourselves, or we can just cruise. We can cruise as well, or we can play like as we did against Newcastle, absolutely brilliantly, and still walk away with a draw. So this is sort of the thing I kind of mentioned in the last podcast with Wale, that this season is just too mad to predict at the moment. Anything can happen. I know it's a cliche, but it really can. So I still think there's going to be some confidence to it, but we'll just have to kind of wait and see what happens.
Yeah, I think a lot has changed since September. Like, we obviously were in a lot worse form than we are now, and it felt like we hadn't clicked yet. We had quite a few new signings who were bedding in. So I think and probably for Chelsea as well, they obviously made so many changes, new manager. So I think it's going to be two different sides to the game that we saw earlier in the season. So it's a bit harder to judge in that sense. So just sort of based on that and what we've spoken about, Dan, how do you see this game going? What are your score predictions? Can we get a draw, a win? What do you reckon?
I think it will be a 2-2 draw. We've started scoring, and we've started to score on the counter a lot more. Sort of that Route 1 style, getting on the and sort of Sarr getting on the end of it, or Mateta getting on the end and just powering straight down the pitch. But we do have a great habit of conceding goals. I think we've only had 3 clean sheets the entire season. So even though sort of Henderson has been doing absolutely brilliantly, and he's done some absolutely insane saves. Like 1 or 2 against Bournemouth that were just sort of, I have no idea if he even knew what was actually happening, but he still managed to get a save out of it. So that would be kind of my prediction, that we are scoring, yes, but we are conceding, which is also the problem. So, and I think getting a draw against Chelsea would be sort of more than enough at the moment. We've got bigger fish to fry coming up. We've got some actual ones that we might be able to get some proper points off of. But my predictions have been a little bit hit and miss so far. So we'll add this one to the pile.
Yes. We should start a spreadsheet of our predictions and see how we get on over the season.
See how we actually do, yeah.
Yeah, everyone chuck a fiver in and see who does the best at the end of the season. To be honest, I'm in the same as you though. Like, my predictions are so all over the place, and it's hard not to back Palace every week, even when we're playing rubbish. You still want to go with a Palace win. But I can't do that against Chelsea, I don't think. So I'm going to go with you as well with the draw. I think it might be a 1-1. I'd like to go for a 2-2 in terms of entertainment value. But I can see us being, like you said, the counter-attacking kind of setup. So I can see us maybe being a bit more back-footed for this game. I think Glasner might have learnt a little bit against Arsenal and might not be so, hopefully not be so open in defence this time. So yeah, 1-1 will be my prediction. I like, your mention of the more direct route that we've been trying, and I reckon Sarr can get in behind the Chelsea defence and, keep scoring, because he's been amazing recently. It's been great to see him actually finding some good form, because he's not had the easiest of life before Palace in the Premier League. So it's good to see his quality coming out. But yeah, so 2-2 for Dan and 1-1 for me. We'll keep you posted next week on how our predictions pan out. But hopefully either one of us is right and we can take at least a point from Chelsea at home. Right, that's been the Daily Palace podcast today. I just want to say a massive thanks, as always, for Dan for joining me. Thanks, mate.
No worries. Always a pleasure.
Cool. And we'll, hope for the best our score predictions come true. If you've enjoyed the pod, give us 5 stars and a follow wherever you get your podcasts. It'll help massively for us in the future. So, yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.